Knuckles the Echidna, one of the toughest Sonic characters and one of the funniest Sonic characters. Knuckles is truly a close friend of Sonic, a true treasure hunter, and most of all, the guardian of the most powerful gem, the Master Emerald. Knuckles has been put through quite the ringer when it comes to his personality, design, and overall characterization. But through it all, Knuckles has remained atop as a fan favorite character within the series and has truly been around since damn near the beginning. Believe it or not, Knuckles actually turned 30 in 2024, and has definitely seen his fair share of appearances in comics, movies, and even games. So the question you might ask yourself, out of all the Knuckles we've received in the last 30 years, which is the best? Well, today I hope to find that answer and find which Knuckles is truly rougher than the rest of them, the best of them, tougher than leather. You can call me Knuckles, unlike Sonic I don't chuckle. Alright, you get the point. But much like my other ranking videos, I do have a few set of rules for this tier list. The first rule that I have in place here, just like the other rankings, is I'm not going to be ranking any characterizations from any of the mobile games. This is simply because there isn't much to talk about them, especially in the likes of Knuckles just running in a straight line. There just isn't much for me to talk about there. But secondly is just my inexperience with the mobile games as well, as it's something that I truly don't play and don't know a lot about. Sure, I could definitely research it and get my own basic opinion off of that, but I feel like that wouldn't be a great representation just like the other characters, and it wouldn't be giving them a fair shot. And then the only other rule that I'm going to have in place is not everything is going to be based on gameplay. I will be taking some consideration into gameplay when it comes to like the classic games, since there isn't a bunch of story to be said there, but I'm going to try my absolute best to not rank it off of gameplay and truly give these Knuckles each a fair chance of being the best. Their main ranking is going to end up being design and mostly personality. But those are truly the only rules that I have for this tier list, so with all that being said, let's rank some Knuckles. And kicking things off with Knuckles' first appearance in Sonic 3 and Knuckles. While this is Knuckles' first appearance in the series, this Knuckles is still very true to how Knuckles is today. And that's still being the guardian of the Master Emerald and still being as gullible as ever. As we've seen many times now, Knuckles is tricked by Dr. Robotnik to fight the likes of our heroes in Sonic and Tails so he can have time to build his Death Egg, and thus starts one of the best rivalries in gaming history in Sonic and Knuckles. And their first encounter and Knuckles' first appearance in the game has got to be one of the most I'm him moments ever. As Super Sonic, yes, the 7 Chaos Emerald beast that is Super Sonic, gets hit so hard by Knuckles, it straight up knocks the Chaos Emeralds out of him, allowing Knuckles to steal them. Even to this day, there has been no character that has hit Sonic that hard that it has straight up knocked him out of his super form. Not even the Titans in Sonic Frontiers could do that. Yes, this was a really long time ago and this was a much younger Sonic and Knuckles, but it still shows just how strong Knuckles actually is. And throughout the rest of the game, we see Knuckles mess with Sonic and Tails, halting their progression and being able to reach Dr. Robotnik. But after all that, all three of them join forces and we see the debut of what we've come to love as Team Sonic. As the three, Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles team up to join forces and defeat the likes of Robotnik and even Mecha Sonic Mark II. What's pretty damn crazy about this whole thing is Knuckles even takes down the likes of Mecha Sonic in his super form. And he does this all by himself inside of the game, showing off just how strong this Red Echidna actually is. So in this game, he not only takes down one super form, but he also takes down another in the likes of Mecha Sonic Mark II. This is the type of energy that I need from Knuckles going forward in future Sonic games. It's just absolutely beating down people. When it comes to Knuckles' abilities in Sonic 3, they're pretty standard to what Knuckles is all about. And that's running at quick speeds, gliding, and climbing up any wall in the game. But this is also the only game to feature Hyper Knuckles in all of his pink glory. Oh, how they massacred my boy years later. But overall, I love Sonic 3 Knuckles, and it's a solid A rank to kick things off. Moving into another classic in Knuckles' very own game, Knuckles Chaotix. Within this game, we see Knuckles team up with the likes of Espio, Mighty, Vector, Charmy, Heavy, and Bomb to take down Dr. Robotnik. An amazing group of characters I'd love to see utilized more in future Sonic games. But while this game is action-packed with amazing characters and we even see a pretty damn cool looking boss in Metal Sonic Kai, this game lacks a lot of story unlike Sonic 3. I mean, the classic games aren't known for their amazing stories, but this game doesn't do much for Knuckles as a character as a whole. And Knuckles' involvement with Team Chaotix is pretty non-existent these days anyways. And the same can be said about the abilities that are used in this game for Knuckles, as they're pretty standard to what Knuckles is all about. There isn't really anything that's different from Sonic 3. He still has his gliding, running at a fast speed, and climbing at certain areas. So while I like the character choice to pair up with Knuckles in this game and the idea of him getting his own game, this is a pretty mediocre Knuckles, so I'm going to throw this in C rank. Moving into the modern era in Sonic Adventure. This is the first game to feature Knuckles treasure hunting, as thanks to the main antagonist Chaos, he attacks Knuckles on Angel Angel Island and smashes the Mastered Emerald into a bunch of pieces, making Angel Island fall to the surface. And now Knuckles' main mission throughout the game is to gather all the Master Emerald pieces and restore the emerald to its original state. One thing I do appreciate about Adventure is genuinely how much backstory we learn about the Knuckles clan. This obviously isn't only about Knuckles, as all the playable characters get sent back in time at some point to learn more about the clan, along with Chaos, the Master Emerald, and the Chao. But while it's not only Knuckles traveling to the past, this does give the player a lot better understanding on the lore of the emerald Knuckles protects, and why he is the last Echidna alive in modern times. Also, this is the first game to feature a lot of characters first time with a voice, Knuckles included. And while this might be the first time that Knuckles actually has a voice, Knuckles actually does stay pretty damn true to his classic self. While in this game, he does remain very strong, very independent, and of course, gullible. As yes, once again, Knuckles is tricked by Eggman in this game, but this is sorted out pretty quickly inside of his story. Sonic Adventure's animation and delivery in lines can come off quite weird sometimes, but this was also Sega's first attempt at it in 1998, so I'll give him a pass this time around, as Knuckles can be quite repetitive with the lines that he says in this game, as I'm sure we all know this one.
Oh no!
But all in all, we see Knuckles have a lot of interactions with other characters and learn more about his clan's history. While this story is pretty simple of him getting the Master Emerald pieces from around the world of Sonic Adventure, it's a story that I've come to love. And sometimes simple is just better. But when it comes to abilities, Knuckles gains his amazing shovel claws and his yellow fighting gloves, allowing him to do a full charged blast. I don't know how much I love yellow gloves on Knuckles, but this ability is pretty cool for an optional power-up inside the game. And his shovel claws are just iconic, allowing Knuckles to dig underground and be able to search for different treasure. And I genuinely think that this is such an amazing fit for him as a character, and with that being said, I'm gonna throw this Knuckles into A rank. Now going into the fan favorite, Sonic Adventure 2. Similar to its predecessor, Knuckles has once again the main objective of gathering the Master Emerald pieces, as it has once again been destroyed, but this time around, things aren't going to be so easy for our Echidna. Knuckles is approached by a newcomer, Rouge the Bat, to hand over the Master Emerald to her, as like Knuckles is a fellow treasure hunter and jewel lover. Rouge doesn't really want it for the power, but more just to feed her jewel addiction. But both being interrupted by Eggman trying to steal the emerald, Knuckles smashes it instead of allowing Eggman to have it. So throughout the game, Knuckles and Rouge look for the pieces of their emerald, along with helping their own teams, with Knuckles joining forces with the likes of Team Sonic. While Knuckles does help them, he truly only cares about one thing, and that's gathering all the pieces of the Master Emerald, and that means reaching Rouge. But Knuckles does eventually restore the emerald after going to space, and even comes to an understanding with Rouge, and his mission is complete. At least so he thinks. The only other time we see Knuckles in the game is actually ended up helping Sonic and Shadow in the final story of the game. But what I actually really enjoy about Knuckles in this game for the story is just how much more challenging things are for him. He even states after Aquatic Mine,
"Looking for the Master Emerald pieces was tougher than I thought it would be."
and we can even feel this in the gameplay point, where stuff feels more challenging and hard compared to Sonic Adventure 1. And it generally helps build more story, and I think it really keeps you on the edge of your seat on what's going to happen next with the treasure hunters. I know I said sometimes simple is just better, but Sonic Adventure 2 does it right for Knuckles. And his voice and character direction are much better in Sonic Adventure 2 as well. But when it comes to abilities and design, Knuckles goes through quite the makeover when you get all of his abilities that are hidden throughout the game. Some of the new abilities consist of the hammer gloves, allowing you to break metal boxes, and his sunglasses, allowing you to see hidden objects. This is only a short list of many upgrades. Cause I don't know who was cooking at Sega, but I think they went a little bit overboard with all the equipment on here for Knuckles. Like, just look at this guy with all that on. That's gotta be heavy. I personally might not love all the upgrades in SA2, at least the way that it looks, but I do love Knuckles' character direction, personality, abilities, and story in this game, and this deserves a top of A rank. And we've finally made it to the Mr. Shitrock Man himself in Sonic Heroes. I mean, come on, you can't tell me you weren't convinced at one point Knuckles was throwing swear words out there before Shadow even was. The unfortunate part of this Knuckles is the lack of voice lines Sega gave him. Heroes has many characters and stories with not having a bunch of cutscenes, so it's hard to give him a lot of judgment when it comes to how he acts in this game, but it's pretty standard to how Knuckles has always been in the modern games. But one line that does always make me smile from Knuckles in this game is,
"But it's so spooky here."
Maybe that's the ghost of Shadow we saw earlier.
Woo! Stop it, Knuckles.
I really like the friendship between Knuckles and Tails here, and it's a pretty wholesome moment, and really makes it seem like Knuckles looks at Tails as a little brother. One thing about the story that I don't love and is somewhat nitpicky is the super forms. I think the Metal Overlord fight had a huge missed opportunity in bringing back the likes of Super Tails and Hyper Knuckles in this moment. Sure, it might be Super Sonic giving him just some of their powers to help him fight Metal Overlord, but we can't act like Sonic didn't do this exact thing in 06 and made Shadow and Silver turn into their super forms. But overall, it's still really cool to see Knuckles and Tails featured in a final boss. When it comes to abilities, Knuckles has a lot of exclusive moves in Heroes, with the likes of turning Sonic and Tails into balls on his fists, which I've always thought looked really cool, along with being able to slam them or even team up with them for a triangle jump. And while the other power characters in the game can do very similar things, I think it just looks right on Knuckles, and is really fitting for his character. Overall, there isn't a bunch to base my judgment on for this Knuckles, but for the moments we actually do get from him, they're pretty solid. So I'll put him in B rank, being our first B on the list. Next up is the Game Boy Advance title in Sonic Battle. Knuckles inside the game can be seen acting quite similar to his SA2 self, where he's very impulsive, hot-headed, but very brave and strong. Within the story for Knuckles, most of his story is hunting down a bot called E1215, who has a striking resemblance to Emerl. Which, when Knuckles does finally meet our robot protagonist, Knuckles appears to be confused, and the relationship starts pretty sour with him confusing him for Fi. But in the end, Knuckles considers Emerl a friend, and even goes as far to give some of the emerald pieces to Tails for Tails to create a Chaos Emerald to put inside of Emerl, and really shows that even though Knuckles can be hot-headed and extremely stubborn, he still sees the good in everyone and is still a hero. When it comes to abilities, Knuckles in my opinion has one of the coolest and most fun movesets in the entire game, with having some crazy heavy attacks to just send any opponent flying on the battlefield, and is a character that I always really enjoyed playing in battle. And overall, I'd say this Knuckles is solid, but I do think that there are a lot better Knuckles out there, and there's still room for improvement with this Knuckles. But I will also be putting this one in B rank. Next up is the series that deserves so much better from Sega, and that's the Rider series. All of the Rider games are pretty short when it comes to story and even gameplay, but I think Riders really does Knuckles right. And for a racing game, makes Knuckles look pretty damn tough right off the bat. In Riders 1, we see Knuckles come down and just absolutely box the hell out of Storm, which, keep in mind, Storm is one pretty big dude and is also a fellow power character in the game. This is also the game that expresses just how funny Knuckles can be as a character. Just this one clip alone always makes me laugh.
That's easy to explain. According to the Kutta-Joukowski lift theorem, the control surface flow is balanced by the inverse kinetics of the...
Stop! I get it, okay? It just floats, and that's good enough for me.
Just Tails giving a history lesson and Knuckles' brain starting to fry is so relatable and just funny. And for the few moments that we actually get with Knuckles and Storm for a rivalry, it's actually a pretty good rivalry at that, as they both are so similar in personality. While I think Knuckles is definitely smarter than Storm, they both do tend to be the hard-hitting goofballs of their groups. And I know I said that Rider somewhat starts to express how funny and goofy Knuckles can actually be, but this also shows how extremely smart he can be at times as well, especially when it comes to history and ancient things, as there's a moment in Sonic Riders Zero Gravity where Knuckles is able to read ancient text and inform his team about what's going on and what the text reads. And this is most likely from his knowledge of the Echidna tribe and things that he learned with his time from the tribe. One thing I'll complain about with this Knuckles is he feels like such a side character. Yes, I get that's kind of his thing, as being a supportive role in Sonic's friends in games, but this game just kind of takes it to a whole nother level of side characterness. Like I said, these games are extremely short, so they have very limited time to give a lot of characters a bunch of lines that aren't Sonic and Jet. But Knuckles just barely talks in the Riders game, and most of the time has just one-liners or quick remarks about things that's going on in the game. For as much as I love this Red Echidna, I just would like to hear more from him in spin-off titles. And considering how well they actually did write him for the times that he does talk, I would have liked to hear more from him in Riders. Free Riders, he does talk a little bit more, but Free Riders as a whole is significantly the worst Riders story and gameplay-wise. And honestly, I just wish I could kind of forget about Free Riders as a whole some days. But all in all, this Knuckles is super solid, and I hope we see the return of Riders Knuckles again soon. I'm going to throw him at the bottom of A rank. Next up is the infamous Sonic 06, where Knuckles is treated quite differently when it comes to his writing. And what I mean by that, for some reason, whenever Knuckles talks, he just seems extremely pissed or upset. And I mean, I don't take Knuckles to be as cheery as Tails or Silver, but I don't know what made him so mad in 06. Considering this is the same dude that just randomly jumps for joy while Sonic's corpse is just on the ground. Maybe that fall in Crisis City did more harm than good to Knuckles. But even then, Knuckles is still seen very little inside of this game, as we only see him when Sonic goes to the ruined future as Knuckles is helping him out in Crisis City and Flame Core, and he also appears in Aquatic Base to be a playable character randomly. I'm sure with enough time Sega probably had more plans for Knuckles, but it's hard to say. Knuckles' abilities are pretty standard to how Knuckles has always been, again probably due to 06 being so undercooked. They probably just didn't have enough time to give him really any new abilities. And he's only playable for a few minutes in Flame Core and Aquatic Base, and at the end of the world. But Knuckles just has his typical punching, gliding, and climbing as he normally does. But ultimately, even without all the abilities and how the game performed, this Knuckles just doesn't feel right or like Knuckles. Yeah, that's definitely the shades of the Knuckles that we know and love, but I really dislike his personality inside of 06, of him just seeming almost annoyed or pissed off all the time. So with that being said, I'm going to put 06 Knuckles in D rank. Moving into the PSP exclusives of Rivals 1 and 2. In the first Rivals, Knuckles actually has his own story inside of the game. But in a way, Knuckles kind of feels like the odd man out, where the story purposes is really more focused on the three hedgehogs of Sonic, Shadow, and Silver. But the story is for Knuckles is that Eggman N steals the Master Emerald with his camera device, turning it into a card. And Knuckles throughout the game hunts him down to get the Master Emerald back. What's somewhat odd is Eggman N explains that the Master Emerald that he has is from the future, and due to the Master Emerald's properties, it made it disappear in all time frames, including the likes of our current timeline, which also explains how Onyx Island is actually the Angel Island of the future. But in the end, Knuckles does end up getting the card back of the Master Emerald and ends up putting it back on Onyx Island, which goes ahead and restores the Master Emerald in all time frames once again. But moving into Rivals 2, where they introduce teams into the mix. And of course, who better to team Knuckles than with a fellow treasure hunter in Rouge? But surprise, surprise, the story is the Master Emerald is missing once again. How original. Rivals 2's story, in my opinion, is much worse than what Rivals 1's story is for Knuckles. At least in Rivals 1, there is at least some interesting plot points to the whole story for him, with the likes of the future and Onyx Island. But basically, Knuckles and Rouge come across an emerald detector created by Eggman to find the Master and the Chaos Emeralds, somewhat similar to the well-known Dragon Radar that you may have seen in Dragon Ball Z. But after fighting the Ifrit and saving the day, Knuckles has yet to find the missing Master Emerald. But Rouge reveals that it's actually been inside the Emerald Detector this whole time, and Knuckles and Rouge end up completing their mission of getting the Master Emerald back. It's a pretty mediocre story if you're asking me for Rivals 2, and Rivals 1 is alright. But honestly, that's just kind of how I feel about Rivals as a whole. It has some good moments and has some bright moments, but overall, it's just a pretty mediocre game. And with that being said, I will respect somewhat of the first Rival story having some interesting story points, so I'm going to go ahead and at least put it in C rank. Next up is the criminally underrated Sonic and the Black Knight. While this isn't technically Knuckles or the Knuckles from our time, and more of just a doppelganger of Knuckles from a storybook, I still felt it was right putting Sir Gawain in this tier list. But Gawain, being a Knight of the Round Table, is a very loyal servant to that of King Arthur. But while still being very loyal to King Arthur, Sir Gawain is still very well known for his extreme stubbornness and being very prideful in himself. So much so, the second Sonic defeats him in battle, he tries to take his own life because he can't live with defeat, which is actually a pretty dark moment for a Sonic game that Sega decides to slide in there. But Sonic ends up stopping Gawain from ending his life, and Gawain basically helps Sonic throughout the rest of the story. And that's with helping take down Merlina. What's actually pretty cool about Sir Gawain is he actually ends up becoming playable within the story, and you get a lot closer look at his fighting style, where we see he has two dagger-like swords where Gawain will throw them almost like boomerangs, and he will do this constantly when you're fighting against him as Sonic. And when actually using him in gameplay, he actually has some similar straights to that of Knuckles, where he's able to glide down on enemies with his swords, but also being able to climb with his swords instead of using his fists. I think his fighting style is pretty fitting for a Knuckles doppelganger, and I really love how they decided to change it up a little bit for him being a little bit more reliant on his swords than his actual fists. It's pretty disappointing that we never got to see really more of the Knights or potentially other Knights that were hidden inside of the two-player mode, but overall I think Sir Gawain has a really cool fighting style, is pretty similar to that of Knuckles, and definitely gets some bonus points for having a pretty rad design. So overall, I'm going to put Sir Gawain in B rank. Next up is another fan favorite in Sonic Mania, where I'm going to include the game and the short series Mania Adventure in one Knuckles. But starting with the game, where Knuckles' story starts up with the hard-boiled heavies excavating the Phantom Ruby from Angel Island, and Knuckles getting teleported to Green Hill. And throughout the game, Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles run through returning and new stages in hopes of stopping Dr. Robotnik. While there isn't a bunch of story like some modern games, one thing I've always liked about Knuckles' story is him going somewhat on his own in Mirage Saloon. While in classic games, it's sometimes hard for Sega to show off the character's personality without them having a voice like the modern games. This is really fitting for Knuckles. While Knuckles doesn't go on his own and is knocked off the tornado, I still like Sega's decision to give him his own unique act and give something fitting for Knuckles in Mirage Saloon. But throughout the rest of the game, we see Team Sonic save the day and restore Little Big Planet once again. This is also the first game in an extremely long time to feature the reunion of Knuckles and Mighty in Sonic Mania Plus. And while it's just DLC, it's always something that I've really appreciated, and I've always thought that they were a good duo with Knuckles and Mighty, and something I'd really like to see return potentially in another classic or even a modern game. But speaking of reunions, we have to talk about Sonic Mania Adventures, the amazing short series of the game. While Knuckles, in my opinion, is the highlight of this series, with some of the funniest and best Knuckles moments. And of course, the insane still shots of Knuckles that come from this series are genuinely timeless. And Knuckles even ends up being the MVP at the end of the series, with sending Eggman and Metal Sonic absolutely flying in one punch and getting his Master Emerald back. Sonic Mania Adventure is a pretty short series, but it's definitely one that I recommend watching if you haven't seen it already. When it comes to abilities, Knuckles again is very standard to his old classic games, and I wish he did somewhat get the Sonic treatment of receiving something new to his moveset like the drop dash that Sonic got. With maybe adding like a digging ability or potentially adding some treasure hunting features inside of his stages in the game, but all of that is more of just a want instead of a complaint about the game, and this Knuckles is truly one of the best and a well-deserving of A rank. Going back to modern times in Sonic Forces. Forces is pretty notorious for being mutually crapped on by Sonic fans, but a lot of people after Sonic Boom thought that Forces saved Knuckles and it was a lot better way to write him. While I do think it's a bit more of a step in the right direction than Boom was for Knuckles, I somewhat disagree. But let me explain. The story shown in the comics where Silver warns Knuckles of Eggman's attacks coming in the future, and with them starting the Resistance preparing for the war against Eggman. The odd and unfitting thing to me is Knuckles becoming the leader of this Resistance. The same guy that's been basically isolated his whole life living alone on Angel Island is in charge of a whole army. While Knuckles' ancestors were in a war, Knuckles truly has never been in a war besides if you want to consider the Black Arms invasion. I will say I don't think anyone was a perfect fit for the role of a leader of the Resistance, especially with the likes of Sonic being believed dead and Tails being gone missing. I do think someone like Amy or potentially bringing in someone like Blaze to help would be a lot better option than Knuckles. But I will also say that Knuckles' leadership is just proven to be bad considering he leads hundreds of soldiers to their death with his so-called Operation Big Wave, where Knuckles states that he thought about this plan for about a minute and a half, and during the act, Amy's saying that 80% of our forces have been wiped out. Knuckles isn't the worst in this, but I definitely wouldn't say that this is a great Knuckles by any means. He obviously leads the Resistance to victory thanks to your avatar and the Sonics, but I think Knuckles just really showed off that he's not fit to be in charge of others or being a leader of an entire Resistance army. And with that, I'm gonna throw this Knuckles in C rank. On the note of right directions, Sonic Frontiers really put Knuckles on the path of success, and genuinely is an amazing representation of what Knuckles is all about. I even considered putting this as the best Knuckles while making this list. This Knuckles is not only in the game of Frontiers, but also is in the stunning short film with Knuckles where we see how serious Knuckles is about his job as a Guardian, but even speaks about some doubts that he has and how life would look like if he didn't have the Guardian job. But I also enjoy seeing his love for the Chao in the film as well, and of course it's always a bonus when we see Knuckles body some enemies. While he does get captured, he does absolutely obliterate some bots, and the short film team that made this did an amazing job. But fast forwarding into the game, we see Sonic freeing Knuckles on Ares Island. And honestly, some of the best moments in the game feature Sonic and Knuckles acting like brothers with bickering and comedy towards each other, but also just showing how much they genuinely have each other's back as being one of their oldest friends. But of course, we can't forget about the best DLC in Sonic history in the Final Horizon update, where Knuckles actually becomes playable for the first time in a mainline game in a very long time, where he has some of the coolest looking abilities that we've ever seen from Knuckles, with the likes of Knuckles having a bunch of drill themed attacks and really cool looking combos. that genuinely just fit for Knuckles super well. I also really enjoy the rewriting of the story of having Tails, Knuckles, and Amy being a big role in helping take down the final boss of the update. Overall, this Knuckles is amazing and generally one of the best that we've ever seen. And I hope for the next 3D Sonic game we get something similar to the Knuckles that we see from Frontiers. And this Knuckles definitely deserves a well top of A rank. And that's it for game appearances that I'd like to go into more detail about with Knuckles. He obviously has a lot more games that he has appeared in and even been playable in, but a lot of those don't have a huge story or he just makes a slight appearance in those games. All the games that I previously covered already in this video are just ones that he was more significant in the story as either a side character or potentially even a main character. So for these next few games, I'm not going to be going into a huge deep dive into each of them and giving them a little bit of an explanation on why I put them in their rank, and I'm going to leave it at that, as a lot of these don't really have a story mode to it or have Knuckles in a big role. If you previously watched this silver ranking video where I ranked every silver, I called this the speed round last time. So with that being said, let's begin the Knuckles speed round. First up is Sonic Triple Trouble on the Game Gear. Knuckles only really ever appears as a boss fight and has some slight appearances where Sonic ends up saving him at the end of the game, but ultimately has a pretty mediocre boss fight where he just ends up throwing bombs at Sonic underwater. But I do kind of like the idea of him using some mech stuff that he gets from Eggman, so I'll go ahead and put him in C rank. Next up is Knuckles the Echidna appearing in Sonic 2. This is basically just taking Knuckles from Sonic 3 and throwing him into Sonic 2, but I'm going to use gameplay for a little bit of the ranking here. I really like the idea of giving his exact moveset from Sonic 3, allowing him to fly and also climb to different spots that weren't reachable before with Sonic and Tails, and it genuinely kind of feels like somewhat of a different game when playing it with Knuckles. And of course, there's always bonus points for allowing us to use the beautiful pink Super Knuckles. So with that being said, I'm going to throw it in B rank. Next up is Sonic Drift 2. There really isn't much to be said here other than just basing it off the design, and I genuinely actually don't like his design for his car that he ends up using. I just don't think it's super fitting for Knuckles, and I don't think that orange goes super well with him. Just kind of a personal preference, but I think this is a deserved D rank. Next up is a personal favorite of mine of Sonic the Fighters. Knuckles' moveset is generally one of the best in the entire game, with him not only having his classic spin dash, but also using a combo of punches and slams and also using the outside ring to his advantage. I really like his fighting style in this, and I think this is a well-deserved B rank. Next up is Sonic 3D Blast. Knuckles just helps you go to a special stage and doesn't actually say anything in the game. He's just kind of a standing NPC, so I think this is a well-deserved D rank. Next up is not to be confused with the last one, but Sonic Blast. Knuckles is actually a playable character inside of this game and is pretty true to his moveset that he's always had of being able to glide. Other than that, he's pretty much a carbon copy to Sonic. But the only reason that he's helping Sonic is just because he simply does not trust him. But keep in mind this is a classic game where Sonic and Knuckles weren't exactly best of friends yet. I actually don't mind the official art and I'll give it some bonus points for that, so I'll go ahead and put this in C rank. Next up is Sonic R. Knuckles again being one of the more fun playable characters inside of this with being able to glide basically endlessly in this game. He will finally go down eventually, but it does take a very long time and it allows you to skip a big part of each of the races. And also this NPC whenever you're up against him is absolutely a menace with taking all the shortcuts that he possibly can. So I'll put Sonic R in B rank. Next up is Sonic Shuffle. There really isn't much to say as there is pretty little to none story in this. But hey, at least we get to see Knuckles drink a nice cold beverage. Next up is Sonic Pocket Adventure, where Knuckles once again appears as a boss fight. And I actually kind of like the art style that this is in for being as simple as it is. But this boss fight is actually also more true to how I think Knuckles' boss fights should actually be, where he's actually gliding and throwing punches at Sonic. So for a short appearance, I'll actually go ahead and throw it in B rank. Next is the Game Boy Advance Sonic Pinball Party. I guess you could kind of say that Knuckles makes an appearance instead of the story mode where you end up facing off against him with Sonic, but even then that's kind of a stretch. But hey, at least he gets his own pinball background. But I'm gonna put this one in D rank. Next up is the Sonic Advance Trilogy. Knuckles again has a moveset that's pretty standard to his old classic self, with having the likes of being able to glide and also climb and also having a spin dash. I really enjoyed the art style of the Advance series and I wish it was something that they would potentially revisit or even remaster. And I always enjoy that Sonic Advance 3 lets you pick two characters, allowing Knuckles and Sonic to team up together in the game, as that was always my personal go-to team. And it's also bonus points that we also see the debut of Mecha Knuckles, with the game featuring two Mecha Knuckles with one being pink with yellow gloves, which kind of remind me of the gloves that he gets in Adventure, but you also have the more robotic one, and I actually prefer this design over the other one, really showing off his mecha side, where it's more of a gray with almost these red bug eyes, which I think genuinely is a really cool design design. And we even see this Mecha Knuckles return in the IDW Comics. I actually wouldn't mind seeing him come back. But I'm obviously not ranking the Mecha Knuckles, it's just kind of bonus points that we get another Knuckles in this game. So with that being said, I'm going to put the Advanced Trilogy in B rank. Next up is his few appearances in Shadow the Hedgehog. Knuckles appears a few times inside of Glyphic Canyon, Central City, and Black Comet, and also the last story. Knuckles just kind of helps you on those specific acts if you're going to do the hero mission inside of those stages. And while Knuckles isn't a huge part of the story, I will give him bonus points for also having my personal favorite Knuckles voice in Dan Green. So I'll at least put this Knuckles in C rank. Next being Sonic Rush. Knuckles makes a very short appearance in this game, but he is technically in the game inside of Blaze's story. He basically just accuses Blaze of having Chaos Emeralds, which she doesn't, she has her Soul Emeralds. But I do think it's always kind of funny of Cream calling him not so bright. But overall, this appearance is extremely short and it doesn't really do anything for Knuckles. So I'm gonna put this in D rank. Moving into Sonic and the Secret Rings. Knuckles is actually inside of the co-op of this game, but in the actual story we know Sinbad of the Seven Seas, which again, like Sonic and the Black Knight, this is just a doppelganger of Knuckles. He makes a very short appearance of Sonic freeing him and him giving him some advice about the world rings, but that's honestly about it. But you do gotta see some friendly banter that are very similar to Sonic and Knuckles. And I actually don't mind this design for Sinbad, and wouldn't mind seeing Knuckles wear something similar to this in the future. So with that being said, I'll go ahead and put him in at least C rank. Next being the Mario and Sonic Olympic series. There is somewhat of a story mode in the DS games, but honestly there isn't very much to talk about within that, and it doesn't do anything for Knuckles as a character, or any Sonic character at that. But this has got to be the only game where your fever dream of Knuckles boxing up Princess Peach can become a reality. I'm just gonna slide this into D rank. Next up is Sonic Chronicles. Sonic Chronicles is kind of an interesting game where Knuckles ends up learning that he's not the last Echidna alive, where he learns that Shade and the Marauders are actually a group of Echidnas that were called the Nocturnus clan. The interesting thing in the story is that Knuckles really struggles to fight Shade and the Marauders, is considering that they're one of his own kind and he's never actually met any other Echidnas. So ultimately he actually ends up saving Shade, even though for most of the game she's the main antagonist. This honestly does kind of feel like somewhat of a fever dream, with Knuckles not being the so-called last Echidna anymore, and a lot of people don't even consider Sonic Chronicles canon, but I guess it's to your own opinion on that. But honestly, I don't love Sonic Chronicles, but I do like their idea of trying to branch out a Knuckles story more, and I wouldn't mind if they went into more depths if they decided to bring back the likes of Shade or potentially even other Echidnas. So that being said, I'll go ahead and put Chronicles in B rank. Next being the Sonic and All-Stars Racing series. I always felt like the ATV was such a fitting thing for Knuckles and one of his best kart choices, even comparing it to the likes of Drift and Riders. It's just really fitting for Knuckles, and that's really something that I like to see. And also I think he has one of the coolest All-Stars inside of the entire game, with him calling upon the Master Emerald and gliding throughout the stage and just punching down on anybody that crosses paths with him. Generally, this is a really cool design for Knuckles, and honestly, I really love using him inside of this game. So that being said, I'm gonna go ahead and also put him in B rank. Next up is Sonic Colors DS. Knuckles again makes a short appearance inside of this game, where he gets tricked by Dr. Eggman, who sent him a letter to appear in Egg Planet Park. Later on, he meets Sonic and ends up challenging him to a mission, where Sonic ends up beating him and he ends up moping over his defeat, and even meets up with the likes of Rouge, accusing her that she's going after the Master Emerald. But in the end, you actually learn that Rouge was the one that ended up writing the letter the whole time, and leaves Knuckles pretty humiliated. It's an alright appearance, it isn't anything great, but it isn't anything bad, so I'll go ahead and at least give it a C rank. Next up being a fan-favorited, Sonic Generations. Knuckles once again has a very short appearance and a little dialogue inside of the game, and he also will help you inside of challenge acts. Where the challenge act is actually pretty funny, where you have Knuckles dig for you for his Knuckles coins. It's actually personally one of my favorite challenge acts inside of the entire game. And overall, in the new writing for Sonic X Shadow Generations, I still think it's pretty damn funny that classic Sonic just looks at his stomach whenever Knuckles questions him about his island.
Thanks, Sonic. Now then, tell me, where is the rest of my island?
But overall, for taking it all seriously, I'll just put this in C rank. Next up being the Wii U title in Sonic Lost World. Knuckles appears alongside Amy in a few different cutscenes inside of Lost World, and genuinely this is probably the closest game we've ever had to Knuckles actually dying. But thankfully Sonic ends up saving the day and restoring the planet, allowing Knuckles to survive. Knuckles is pretty true to himself, with him bickering at Sonic, but also having a lot of confidence in himself in the cutscenes. But I also like the side of him also protecting the animals, as well as kind of seeming more like a hero in this. It's a very short appearance, and again, very hard to judge this off of, but I'll give this one a B rank. Next up being Team Sonic Racing. I really like the short animation of showing some of the most cursed looking still shots of Knuckles in history, especially this one. But I've said this many times in the past, I think that the story for Team Sonic Racing is pretty mediocre. I will say that Knuckles is probably one of the most logical characters inside of this entire story, where he's completely suspicious of Dodonpaw throughout the entire story. And he's somewhat right. Obviously Dodonpaw doesn't end up being a bad guy, but he does learn that he's being used by Eggman. So while Knuckles isn't always the brightest of bulbs, like Cream says in the past, I do think that he sometimes can use his brain to kind of figure out what's going on. And I definitely like the more souped up version of his ATV that he has in here. I definitely prefer the previous version, but this one actually doesn't look that bad. So that being said, I'll go ahead and throw this one in C rank. Next being the most recent classic game in Sonic Superstars. The story for each character is roughly about the same. Knuckles does have one exclusive act in Golden City, but it doesn't really add anything too much to the story. But I do enjoy Knuckles being along for the ride for the entire story and being playable throughout the entire game. And it's not just exclusively Sonic. And I also do really enjoy the art style and generally the models that they use for Sonic Superstars. I think they look really good. And Knuckles also has a new punching ability where he's able to send an air punch to hit enemies and break boxes in his path. And that's all possible with the extra Chaos Emerald ability. This is a pretty cool ability, and I wouldn't mind seeing Knuckles use this again in another classic game. Overall, this Knuckles is pretty standard to how Knuckles is in every other classic game, but I think B rank is a good spot for him. And finally, the last Knuckles in the speed round with Lego Knuckles. This Knuckles is featured in LEGO Dimensions and Sonic Superstars, but also the few ads we got for the LEGO Sonic sets. I do really enjoy his appearance in the LEGO Sonic show, of him trying to protect all the Master Emeralds that are being produced for the set. It's a pretty funny and overall cute shot, but also his big mech that he actually ends up getting in his LEGO set is pretty damn cool looking, and I wouldn't mind seeing this in a game. LEGO Knuckles appearances are pretty limited, but for the times that we actually have gotten him, I really like him. So I'm gonna also go ahead and throw this one in B rank as well. Alright, that's it for the Knuckles speed round. Now it's time to finish things off with movies, shows, and comics. But kicking things off is Sonic OVA. This movie is only about an hour long, but it's an hour of pure fun and enjoyment. I love this movie, and I truly think it's underrated and a hidden gem. But when it comes to this Knuckles, he is slightly different than his game appearances that we know him for, as OVA was intended to please more of the Western audience for Sonic fans. And you can instantly notice that with Knuckles' voice acting and his cowboy hat that he has featured in the movie. Which, let me say, the hat is one of my favorite things about Knuckles ever. I think it's just so fitting for him, and it's just so damn cool. And I love that they decided to bring it back for the Knuckles show. This Knuckles also has some great one-liners. I catch myself quoting, "Huh? My hat's on fire!" a lot more times than I probably would like to admit. But I will say one thing I'm still puzzled about even to this day is how can this Knuckles just fly in the movie? Knuckles can obviously glide, as we all know, but this guy literally flies endlessly. I've always thought that it was a little bit odd, but oh well. But overall, this Knuckles is great. And yes, this is your sign to rewatch or watch OVA for the first time, as it's an amazing movie. But he belongs in A rank. Next up being in our first TV series in Sonic Underground. I can't say that I'm a huge fan of Underground, but I don't think Knuckles is as terrible as some people make him out to be in this show. He only appears in a few episodes, but is always fooled by Robotnik to hunt down Sonic and his siblings, and is pretty true to who Knuckles is with being a guardian and again always being super naive and fooled by Robotnik. While I don't think that this Knuckles deserves as much hate as he gets, I will say this is probably my least favorite Knuckles design. He just looks really bad, and there's some points in the show where he just looks really off to how he actually looks. And I can't say that I love the voice for this Knuckles, I just don't think it fits him extremely well.
Then the wolf faces left the floating island. Left? Seems hard to believe, Nuck. They're always after something. The emerald!
And also, the whole thing with him hitting on Sonic's sister Sonia in the episodes is just really awkward, considering in the games we see him as one of Sonic's best friends. But overall, this Knuckles is not awful. It has a lot of flaws, but I think C rank is a good spot for him. Next is another show and a personal favorite of mine in Sonic X. And Knuckles in this show is amazing. Considering that this was before the big Sonic Boom rewriting of making him a muscled idiot, this Knuckles is just genuinely funny for just the simple fact of how much of a smartass he is throughout the entire show. This also adds to just how amazing the duo of Sonic and Knuckles is, and some of their best moments come from this show. Not only does he have a great personality, he genuinely has one of the best character developments in the show. Knuckles starts off as a really standoffish, grumpy Echidna, but he really starts to warm up and become trusting and friends with not only the Sonic cast, but the humans as well. And genuinely, it is a bonus that Dan Green voiced Knuckles during this time. As I said earlier, I think that my personal favorite voice actor for Knuckles was Dan Green. And while I think Sonic and Knuckles are a great duo within the show, I think that comes pretty unmatched when it comes to Knuckles and Rouge. They both have some of the best scenes in the entire show and some of the most humorous scenes as well. I think they're two of the best characters inside of the entirety of Sonic X, and they're truly really big highlights of the show. The show is amazing and definitely a great representation of what Knuckles is all about. I think this is a solid A rank. Well, we finally made it to the one and only Sonic Boom. Now, with Boom Knuckles, it was extremely hard to rate him as his game appearance and his cartoon appearance are so different. On one hand, you have the amazing funny animated series, but on the other, you have the musclehead with jokes that just fall flat or simply isn't funny. While I'll admit I don't love the Buffles design, I can't deny out of any of the characters or characterizations of any Sonic character, Boom Knuckles has made me laugh and smile the absolute most. I mean, his writing is so good and genuinely so funny in the show. I have friends who send me memes from the show and yet have never watched an actual single second of the actual show. If that doesn't show how good the writing and the character is, I don't know what will. But when it comes to ranking them, the game in Boom Knuckles falls pretty flat and boring and is for sure a D rank. So I'm going to include them as separate characters, so I'm going to stick him in D rank, but I'm also going to go ahead and put the show version of Boom Knuckles in high A rank. Next is the Netflix series in Sonic Prime. Prime is going to be kind of interesting, as if you haven't seen the show features multiple dimensions. Sonic ends up going through each dimension inside of the show, and of course each dimension features a different version of the main cast members. And of course that means Knuckles. So in total in the entire show of Sonic Prime, there are 4 different versions of Knuckles, with the show featuring Standard Knuckles, Renegade Knuckles, Gnarly Knuckles, and Knuckles the Dread. So I'm going to be putting them all in this list as separate characters. And of course, kicking things off is just plain old Knuckles. While not in the show a bunch, I like that this Knuckles seems a little bit smarter and is still just as funny as ever. As in 75% of the time that we actually see this Knuckles, he just ends up bench pressing a boulder in the background. I can't say that I love the voice actor for this Knuckles, as it doesn't feel super fitting for him.
So, we start at the scene of the crime.
And that might also be a reason why the other 3 Knuckles that are in the show feature a different voice actor, as maybe Netflix or Sega decided that they didn't love the voice as much for that Knuckles, so they decided to bring in somebody else. So for not being in the show a bunch and genuinely not even having that many lines and just bench lifting a boulder, I'm just gonna stick him in C rank. On to the next Prime variant and Renegade Knux from New York City. What I will say right off the bat is I really like Renegade's design. Something about the scars, the beanie, and the metal knuckle dusters is sick. But I will say his personality is a little bit different than the Knuckles we're used to. Being that he has Knuckles' hot-headedness and willpower, but really lacks the motivation and fire that Knuckles has. And almost seems depressed in the show. To be fair, his home was taken over by the Chaos Council and is constantly in a war with them, so I think it's kinda fair to see him a little down at times. I can't say that I would love that for the Knuckles that we're used to in the games, but for Renegade and just kind of a one-off in a show, I think it's totally fine. And I think he has a lot of potential of being a really cool character. So I feel really confident in putting him in B rank. On to the next in Gnarly Knuckles, who appears in the Boss Cage Maze dimension. While Knuckles has always been quick to judge and accuse people, and just a little bit paranoid, Gnarly cranks that to the literal max and is just straight up paranoid all the time, even accusing Sonic the second that they meet, and even talking to the trees and saying that they're listening. This Knuckles is quite a mess, but it can be pretty damn funny at times, so I'll at least give it a C rank. And lastly, my personal favorite in Sonic Prime is Knuckles the Dread. Knuckles the Dread is a captain of a pirate crew in the No Place dimension. But this Knuckles is basically a selfish, greedy, and deranged version of Knuckles. And for some reason, I love it. While Dread will backstab just about anyone for his own selfish agenda, it just really works well for a pirate version of Knuckles. It also probably doesn't help that this guy just has some extreme PTSD from his past crew and adventures. But his fighting is pretty damn cool, with having some hand-to-hand combat that's very similar to that of Knuckles, but also has some extreme swordsmanship. Overall, I loved Dread, and I think is one of the best things to come out of Sonic Prime, and I'm gonna stick him in A rank. Why do I get the feeling that someone's gonna roast me in the comments for that one? And finally, on to the comics. And of course, starting things off is the Archie Comics. And boy, where do I begin with Archie Knuckles? This Knuckles by far has the most story and complicated history out of any Knuckles on this list. And you could honestly sit here all day talking about his entire history. But I'll go over some of the main points and my favorite things about this Knuckles. As you may know, the Archie Comics went through 2 writing teams, under the first of Ken Penders and the second under current Sega writer in Ian Flynn. And while Ken Penders had his problems after being let go, I will say some of his crazy ideas that made the story seem chaotic and simply confusing. For example, Knuckles being an experimental mutant because of his abusive, power-hungry father, or even Knuckles awakening those powers and even dying trying to save his uncle. Knuckles' story is obviously drastically different in the Archie comics, but while these ideas were pretty damn crazy from Ken Penders, I will say when they brought in Ian Flynn, he really made the chaotic mess into something that's actually really enjoyable, and really did justice for our red Echidna. Where Knuckles under Ian's writing leaves his father and his job as guardian, and that's to go off with his friends and stop Eggman. While his father does disagree with Knuckles, this is the first time we really get to see how Knuckles would act without the duty of a guardian holding him down. The same thought that Knuckles had in Frontiers, where he no longer has the responsibility and the burden of protecting Angel Island. But instead, his father, Locke, ends up taking back the title of Guardian, as he was the Guardian before Knuckles was. And with Knuckles doing so, he not only has the courage to stand up to his abusive and manipulative father, but also finds friends and even love in a pink Echidna known as Julie Sue, who in my opinion is a great pairing for Knuckles. But everything goes south when Dr. Finidifus comes into the picture, who in my opinion is Knuckles' greatest foe and straight up just a cool ass villain. But Dr. Finidifus ends up fooling Knuckles' father, Locke, into watching over the Master Emerald, while Locke goes out and looks for the other guardians of Angel Island, as they've been missing for some time now. But while Knuckles finally seems happy after all that he's been through, that all comes crashing to an end. As with Peace and Eggman defeated, Knuckles decides to go back to Angel Island alone, as he's looking to catch up with his father and the rest of the Echidnas. But after arriving, he's immediately ambushed and ends up finding Dr. Finidifus with the Master Emerald. With what seems like Dr. Finidifus taking over Angel Island and becoming the new guardian of the Master Emerald, Knuckles attempts to harness the power of the Master Emerald, but that's immediately when everything goes wrong, and thus Knuckles is tricked and Enerjack is reborn. With the Knuckles that we know and love and Enerjack reborn, who is being possessed by Dr. Finidifus, his goal is to destroy everything and make the world start over. This is the first time we truly see a version of Knuckles as a true villain, and even tries to hurt the ones that he loves. But this is also the strongest Knuckles to exist as well, being able to put up a fight against the likes of Supersonic. Well, for the most part. One thing I do love is just how much Sonic sees Knuckles as a brother, as even though Knuckles is long and forgotten, all that exists is Enerjack, Supersonic during the fight very much doesn't take things seriously and holds back, hoping to break through to his longtime friend. But unfortunately, nothing that Sonic does works, and we learn that the only way that Knuckles can come back to his senses is if someone is to sacrifice themselves to the Master Emerald, and that ends up being Knuckles' father, Locke. So Knuckles is finally back to his former self, but at what cost? Knuckles never got to say goodbye to his father, and his father is gone forever, and it eats at him for an extremely long time in the comics. Knuckles expresses that he can't live with the fact of all the crimes and destruction that he caused as Enerjack. So with not being able to live with himself, he takes back his role as Guardian and will do it alone and isolate himself on Angel Island with the Master Emerald. I do love that while this Knuckles is trying to fight a lot of personal issues within himself, he does try to apologize to the people that he hurt along the way as Enerjack, and truly does not give up, and that's what makes this Knuckles so great. And no matter what happens, even if he isolates himself and even if he pushes everyone away that he's loved, he must do what's right and never give up on himself. But a big thanks to that has to be given to his long-term girlfriend in Julie Sue being able to calm him down and see the bigger picture and everything. And with that, Knuckles regains his confidence slowly and is truly back to his normal self. Whew. And honestly, that's just scratching the surface with Archie Knuckles. But without a doubt, this Knuckles is great, and I recommend reading more into his story. At least the Ian Flynn take on it. So with that being said, this is definitely a easy A rank. And of course, on the topic of Ian Flynn, we must talk about the IDW Comics. Knuckles within the IDW Comics is pretty true to how he acts in the game and even reminds me of his old self. But if there was one word to describe this Knuckles, it's guardian, as this Knuckles is constantly guarding the Emerald and rarely wants to leave or risk the Master Emerald's protection with someone other than himself. I will say in the early issues of the comics, Knuckles is still in his leadership role of the Resistance, as the beginning of the comics takes place right after the events of Sonic Forces. But you already know how I feel about Knuckles in that role from my Forces ranking. But this is also the reason on why Knuckles becomes even more paranoid about Angel Island and the Master Emerald. Because while Knuckles is being a leader of an army, Metal Sonic sneaks onto Angel Island, harnessing the power of the Master Emerald, allowing him to become Super Neo Metal Sonic. So Knuckles, learning that he needs to keep a better watch on the island, he books it to Metal Sonic's location. And this is the Knuckles that we know, the Knuckles that doesn't think about a plan, but who charges in with no fear and ready to throw hands with anyone who tries to touch his precious Master Emerald. And I love just how silly this Knuckles acts towards his love of the Master Emerald. Just look at him all happy. But while Sonic and Knuckles struggle to fight against Super Neo Metal Sonic, thanks to Shadow's unexpected help, he's able to restore the Emerald to its rightful place. And with Metal defeated and everything back to normal, Knuckles disbands the Resistance and becomes the Guardian full-time once again. And all is fine until the Metal Virus finds its way to Angel Island, where everyone ends up on the island eventually, and even Knuckles gets involved in the fight against the virus, and even ends up getting defeated, becoming a Zombot himself. To be fair, this Knuckles is strong, but he did end up fighting the one Zombot who has the title of the Ultimate Life Form. So I'll let Knuckles losing this fight slide. But after Sonic and Silver save the day, Knuckles is freed and resumes being the Guardian once again. I will say I really like the short meetups and interactions that he ends up having with Blaze and Amy in the comics, with telling Amy just how much he actually ends up trusting her, and giving Blaze Guardian advice as she is a fellow Guardian of the Soul Emeralds. But my complaint for this Knuckles would have to be he feels like such a background character sometimes, and sometimes even feels underutilized by the writing team. But for the moments that we do actually end up getting, this Knuckles is great, and I hope that Ian and his team have more plans for this Knuckles, as I think this Knuckles has a lot of potential, and even potential to be the best Knuckles there is. But for now, I do definitely prefer the Archie version of Knuckles, but I still think that he is a fellow A rank. Well, we finally made it to the final Knuckles. The Knuckles that I personally think is the best. So here's my list so far of every Knuckles that we've talked about. Let me know what you agree or disagree with the list so far. But with that being said, the Knuckles that I put at the top and who I think is rougher than the rest of them has to be Movie Knuckles. If you think about all the Knuckles that we've talked about within this video and took all the good from each of them, that's Movie Knuckles. This Knuckles, in my opinion, has the best design for Knuckles. It's the perfect balance between the game version of Knuckles and also his beefed up Boom design. And what I love about it is it's not as awkward or drastic looking as Boom's design, but it also makes him look like the strong character of the group and the Sonic cast. Because if you look at his game design, it's kind of hard to tell if you don't know about Knuckles that this is the strong fighter in the series. But not only that, he has the determination, confidence, and strength of Game Knuckles and the comedy of Boom Knuckles. And the best part about this Knuckles is he's not dumb. I mean, I'm sorry if that's harsh, but Boom Knuckles is just dumb.
Oh wait, I can't read.
That's how they write him. Movie Knuckles is uneducated about life, considering that he's been alone his entire life. So yeah, he does lack social skills and is extremely naive, but that's what makes him so damn funny. Like, how is this scene not funny?
Just chilling, watching TV. Dot, 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 dot.
And he's also got to be the only character that can make eating grapes funny. But this Knuckles humor isn't the main reason why I love this big guy. He's also done right in being extremely strong. I mean, he actually one-shot Sonic in Movie 2. In Movie 3, he does kind of get smacked by Shadow, but again, like I said in the IDW Comics ranking, he's the ultimate life form, so we'll give him a pass. And while I don't love the name of
The Flames of Disaster!
I do think that fire abilities have always really suited Knuckles and look really cool on him. But arguably the best moment and one of the big deciding factors for me ranking him as the top has to come from the most recent movie in Sonic Movie 3, where Tom ends up getting hurt by Shadow and Sonic wants to use the Master Emerald to go super and go after Shadow. But Knuckles sees Sonic is in a blind rage over Tom getting hurt and is not afraid to stand up to his friend and tell him what he thinks is right. And truly just shows how responsible this Knuckles actually is, as not only as a friend, but also as a guardian, and is also willing to stand up for Tails when Sonic gets upset at Tails. But in the end, even after you think Knuckles is gonna fight Sonic, he powers down, showing that even in his rage, he still trusts his friend, who he considers a brother, to make the right choices. But all this has to be thanks to the incredible work done by Idris Elba. His work and delivery for Knuckles is top-notch. And I know that I said Dan Green was my personal favorite Knuckles throughout this ranking video, but I'm gonna let my nostalgic bias leave the room for a second and say that Idris is the best Knuckles, and I have to admit that. And I truly have to give him his flowers for just how incredible he has made Knuckles in the movies and the Knuckles show. His work has been absolutely incredible, and every time Knuckles is on screen, it's truly a joy to see what's going to happen or how he's going to deliver Knuckles. I really tried to find something to complain or possibly say something that I don't like about movie Knuckles, but I could not find a single thing that I disliked about this character. This is truly the best version of Knuckles, and you can't tell me differently. Everything about this Knuckles, in my opinion, is perfect. And with Sonic Movie 4 already being announced and more information coming out about that just about every week lately, I can't wait to see how Knuckles is going to be in that movie again, as I think he is truly a really big highlight of the entire movie series. But that's my ranking of every Knuckles the Echidna that's ever made an appearance in game, show, movie, or comic. Let me know what you agree or disagreed in the comments below, and let me know what your guys' favorite Knuckles is in the comments below, as I would love to know what you guys think. Putting all the time and research into this video truly made me understand just how much I love the Red Echidna, and truly just how he is one of the best Sonic characters to ever exist. And we're truly spoiled as Sonic fans to have a character like Knuckles in the series. And I can't wait to see what the future holds for this Red Echidna, as I think it's a very bright one. But with that being said, guys, be sure to like the video and subscribe if you want to see some more ranking videos, as these videos are a bunch of fun and it seems like you guys really enjoy them. But I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.